I was in the garage, same as every Saturday morning, when my phone buzzed on the workbench. I'd been out there since 6. Not because I had to be, just because the garage was mine. 42 years of early mornings had made me the kind of man who doesn't know what to do with stillness, so I fill it with something useful. That morning it was the old rocking chair my wife had been asking me to refinish for 2 years. She passed before I got around to it. So now I was getting around to it. The phone screen said my daughter's name. She never called on Saturdays. She knew Saturdays were my mornings. We had an agreement, not spoken, just understood the way things are when you've known someone their whole life. I set down the sandpaper and picked up, Dad. One word. That's all she said. But I've been her father for 34 years and I know every register of her voice. That one word hit me somewhere below the sternum. Where are you? I said. She didn't answer right away. I could hear traffic, wind, the kind of background noise that means outside, not at home. Sweet Pia. I hadn't called her that since she was 9. It just came out. Where are you right now? The park on Callaway, by the fountain. That park was 6 blocks from the house she shared with her husband and their daughter. 6 blocks, and she was sitting by a fountain on a Saturday morning with traffic sounds in the background. Stay there, I said. I'm coming. I didn't ask why. Didn't ask what happened. When your child calls you with that voice, you don't ask. You go. I found her on a bench near the east side of the fountain, the one under the big oak that loses its leaves early every fall. My daughter, 34 years old, sitting with her back straight the way her mother taught her, holding a paper coffee cup in both hands like it was the only warm thing left in the world. Next to her on the bench was a duffel bag, the green one I'd given her for Christmas 3 years ago, and a rolling suitcase I recognized from a family trip to Savannah. My granddaughter was asleep against her mother's shoulder. She was 4. Her name is June, and she had her little sneakers on the wrong feet, which told me the morning had been rushed. I sat down on the other side of the duffel bag. My daughter looked at me. Her eyes were dry, which was almost worse than if she'd been crying. He fired you, I said. It wasn't a question. I'd been watching this come for 8 months. She shook her head once. His father did. I was quiet for a moment. A jogger went by. A dog barked somewhere across the park. Tell me, I said. She took a long breath and started talking. My son-in-law worked for his father's company. Had been there 11 years, since before he and my daughter got married. The company was called Hargrove Logistics. His father, a man named Edmund Hargrove, had built it from a 2-truck operation in the early 90s into a regional freight and warehousing business with about 400 employees across 3 states. The man had money, and he made sure everyone in a 30-mile radius knew it. My daughter had worked there too, in the accounting department. She was good at her job. Better than good, actually. She had a degree from Georgia State, and she'd passed her CPA exam on the first try, which a lot of people don't. But to Edmund Hargrove, none of that mattered much. What mattered to him was that she was mine. He'd made that clear from the beginning, in the particular way that men like him make things clear, without ever saying them outright. The small comments at family dinners. The way he'd redirect conversations about the business away from her. The time he introduced her at a company event as my son's wife without using her name. My son-in-law would laugh those moments off. My daughter would smile and file them away. I knew about most of it. We talked, she and I, every Tuesday evening when her husband had his poker night. She'd call while June was in the bath, and we'd talk for an hour. I knew what Edmund Hargrove thought of us, but I also know how to wait. That Friday, the day before she called me from the park, Edmund had called my son-in-law into his office. My daughter had been 2 floors down in accounting when it happened. According to what my son-in-law told her that night, his father had been direct. Blunter than usual. He'd told him that the company was going through changes, that he was restructuring the leadership team, that he needed people around him whose judgment he trusted completely, without question, without divided loyalties. My son-in-law had asked what that meant. Edmund had said it meant he didn't think my daughter was the right fit for the company anymore, that she was a distraction, that her background, and he used that word, wasn't what he'd envisioned for the family's future in the business. My son-in-law asked him to explain what he meant by background. Edmund said he meant all of it, where she came from, who her father was. He said our family wasn't the kind of people he'd built his business to support, and he wasn't going to leave what he'd created to bloodlines he didn't respect. Bloodlines. That's the word he used. My son-in-law, to his credit, had stood up right then and said that if his father was letting my daughter go, he was going too. Edmund had apparently not expected that. There'd been a long silence, and then Edmund had said, "Fine, collect your things." My daughter had been called up to HR that same afternoon. 20 minutes to clear her desk. IT disabled her access before she finished. Standard practice, they said. Nothing personal. She'd driven home alone. When my son-in-law got home that evening, he and my daughter had talked until 2 in the morning. She said he kept apologizing. She kept telling him to stop. By morning, they'd agreed on one thing. They weren't staying in the house anymore. It was in his father's name. Edmund owned it, same as he owned most things in that family's life. My son-in-law had called his father that morning to tell him they were out by end of day. Edmund had said good. Sent a moving company over by 10. So that was how my daughter ended up at the fountain, with June asleep on her shoulder and her shoes on the wrong feet. I sat with that for a minute. The sun had moved enough that it was coming through the oak branches and hitting June's hair and making it look the same color it did when she was a baby in the hospital, and I'd held her for the first time and thought, well, here's the whole thing right here. What did he say? Exactly. The word. My daughter looked at me. He said we weren't the kind of bloodline he'd built his business to support. Those were his words. I nodded slowly. She was watching my face. She'd been watching my face since she was small, trying to read what I was thinking. I've always been told I'm hard to read. Her mother used to say it was my best quality and my worst one. Are you angry? She said. I'm many things, I said. But are you angry? I looked at June, still asleep. Little chest rising and falling. I'm going to need you to trust me, I said. Both of you. My daughter tilted her head slightly, the same way she did at 7 when she was trying to figure out if I was being serious or playful. Trust you to do what? Just trust me, I said. Can you do that? She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, I always have. I want to explain something about who I am because it matters to the rest of this. I grew up in Decatur, Georgia, not the part of Decatur people move to now, but the other part, the part where the houses were small and the summers were long, and your father worked 2 jobs so your mother wouldn't have to. My father drove a delivery truck for 30 years. Good man, quiet man. Never complained about a single day of it that I heard. I started my own business when I was 26. Nothing glamorous. A small freight brokerage, just me and a landline and a folding table in the spare bedroom of my first apartment. I arranged shipments for manufacturers who needed things moved and carriers who had space to move them. I was the middleman, the person who made the phone calls. I was good at it. I was very good at it, actually. What I wasn't good at was talking about it. My wife used to say that if modesty were a sport, I'd hold every world record. She meant it as a joke, mostly. But it was also true that I had my reasons for keeping quiet. In business, I'd learned early that the quieter you are about what you have, the more carefully people show you who they really are. Men who knew I had money behaved differently than men who didn't know. I preferred the ones who didn't know. So I kept it close. The growth of the company, the acquisitions, the contracts. I told my wife everything, always. She was the only one. When she got sick, I told my daughter I was doing well, and she knew better than to push. That was 6 years ago. After my wife passed, I threw myself into the work the way grieving men sometimes do, and the company grew faster than it ever had, which was not something I'd planned, but wasn't something I stopped either. By the time Edmund Hargrove looked at my daughter across a conference room table and used the word bloodline, I had been in the logistics business for 34 years. I had a company with over 800 employees across 7 states. I had contracts with 3 of the top 15 retailers in the country. I had warehouses in Atlanta, Nashville, Charlotte, and Columbus. I had an office on the 14th floor of a building in Midtown Atlanta with my name on the door. Edmund Hargrove had heard of my company. Most people in the regional freight business had. He just didn't know it was mine. Nobody did except my lawyers, my CFO, and my wife, God rest her. I want to tell you why I never said anything. People always ask that. If you had all that, why didn't you ever just tell her? Tell your son-in-law? Set the record straight? Because that's not what I wanted for my daughter. I wanted her to be loved for who she was. I wanted her husband to be with her, because she was brilliant and funny and kind, not because of what her father had sitting in a portfolio. I wanted her to know that whatever she built, she'd built it because of her, not because of me, not because of my name, not because someone was working an angle. And I wanted to see who the people around her really were when they thought I was just some retired freight broker with a modest house in a nice enough suburb and a garage full of weekend projects. Edmund Hargrove showed me exactly who he was. So now it was my turn. The following Monday, I made 2 phone calls before 8 in the morning. The first was to my CFO, a methodical, unflappable man named Terrence, who had been with me for 19 years and who had seen me make decisions that seemed strange and turn out to be correct, often enough that he'd stopped questioning them at a certain point. I need you to run something by legal, I said. I want to make an offer to acquire. There was a brief pause. Acquire what? I told him. Another pause. Longer this time. You're serious. I've looked at their books, I said. They've been carrying debt for 4 years. 3 of their largest contracts are up for renewal in the next 18 months. They've got equipment that's 6 years past replacement cycle. It's not a strong position. Terrence was quiet for a moment. I could hear him thinking. And you want to acquire them, why exactly? Because I can, I said. Pull the numbers together and have legal draft a preliminary offer. Fair market, nothing predatory. I want to do this clean. The second call was to a man named Gerald, a broker I'd worked with for years, who had relationships with half the major property owners in the metro area. I asked him about a particular building downtown that I'd had my eye on for 2 years. He told me it had been on the market for 9 months. I told him to make an offer. Then I drove to my daughter's place. She and my son-in-law were staying with me now in the spare rooms, which was the first time I'd had anyone in those rooms in 6 years, and I found her at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee and a legal pad, writing out job applications. I sat down across from her. She looked up. I want to offer you a job, I said. She set down her pen. Doing what? Running the Southeastern Accounting Division. She stared at me. I'm not doing charity if that's what you're thinking, I said. You're a licensed CPA and you have 11 years of logistics experience. The Southeastern Division is the one I'm most focused on growing right now. The timing is what it is, but the offer is real. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Dad, what are you talking about? What Southeastern Division? I told her the name of the company. She stared at me for a very long time, she said slowly. I used Google when I was applying for. She stopped. Dad, that company has warehouses in 4 states. 7 now, I said. We're adding 2 next year. The color changed in her face. Not shock exactly. More like watching something she'd almost understood for years finally come into focus. How long, she said. 34 years. She was quiet. I watched her process it the way she's always processed things, methodically working backwards, checking it against what she knew. Mom knew, she said. It wasn't a question. Your mother knew everything, I said. She looked down at her legal pad, at the job applications. She'd already filled out 4 pages of notes. Even in the middle of all of this, she'd been working. That was her mother in her. Why didn't you ever tell me, she said. I told her the same thing I told you, about wanting her to be seen for who she was, about not wanting anyone to work an angle. She listened without interrupting, the way she always has. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, he said we weren't good enough. Our bloodline, I know. And you had all of this. I know. She looked at me. Something moved across her face that I couldn't quite name. It wasn't anger. It wasn't triumph, either. It was something quieter than both of those. What are you going to do? She said. I'm going to make an offer to buy Hargrove Logistics, I said. Clean, fair price. It's the right business move. Their debt structure is not healthy, and their contracts are at risk. After the acquisition, I'll fold the operation into ours. She understood immediately what that meant. He'll have to negotiate with you. With our legal team, yes. He won't know who's making the offer until the preliminary terms are agreed. That's standard in these transactions. She sat with that. And you're sure this is about the business? She said, not about him. I thought about Edmund Hargrove saying the word bloodline. I thought about my daughter sitting on a bench in a park with June's shoes on the wrong feet. Both things can be true, I said. She almost smiled. That's very dad of you. I thought so, I said. The acquisition process took 11 weeks. My legal team handled the initial contact through a holding company we used for this kind of thing. Hargrove Logistics received a formal letter of interest. Edmund Hargrove, according to what filtered back through intermediaries, was initially resistant. He spent 3 weeks trying to shop counteroffers from other buyers, which told us everything we already knew. He needed the deal. He was just trying to negotiate from a position he no longer had. The counteroffers didn't materialize into anything real. They rarely do when the underlying numbers are what they are. By week 7, his lawyers and my lawyers were in the same room. The terms were straightforward. We would assume their existing debt, pay fair market value for the physical assets, and absorb their active contracts. His employees, the 400 of them, the ones who actually kept that operation running day to day, would be offered positions within our company. That was important to me. Those people hadn't done anything wrong. Edmund Hargrove himself was offered a standard transition consulting period of 90 days, which is normal in acquisitions of this size. After that, his formal relationship with the company would end. He agreed to everything. He still didn't know who was on the other side of the table. The final signing was on a Thursday, in a conference room on the 14th floor of our building in Midtown. I'd had Terrence arrange it. I usually sent my COO to these things, but not this time. I was already seated when they brought Edmund Hargrove in. He came through the door talking, something to one of his lawyers about parking, and then he saw me and he stopped. I'd met the man twice before, both times at family events. He'd been courteous to me in the way that people are courteous to someone they've already decided doesn't matter. The second time we'd met, at my granddaughter's 3rd birthday party, he'd shaken my hand and asked me what I did, and I'd told him I was in logistics, semi-retired, and he'd nodded with the practiced smile of a man who has already moved on to the next conversation. He was not smiling now. He looked around the room, at the company logo on the wall behind me, at Terrence, seated to my left, at the stack of documents on the table. He looked back at me. I didn't say anything. I gestured to the chair across the table and waited. He sat down slowly, his lawyers, everyone settled. He started. I'm the principal, I said. This is my company. I believe you know who I am. He knew. I could see him recalculating everything. 11 weeks of negotiations. Every conversation his lawyers had reported back about the buyer. The holding company name that hadn't meant anything to him. He sat very still. That particular kind of stillness that a man has when he's trying to compose himself and isn't quite succeeding. I wasn't aware, he said. No, I said, you weren't. There was a silence, the kind that has weight. His lead lawyer said something about proceeding to the signature pages. Papers moved. Pens came out. Edmund Hargrove looked down at the documents in front of him. I watched him read the first page. His jaw was set. A muscle moved in his cheek. He signed. He signed every page without another word. When it was done, his lawyer closed the folder and said they'd be in touch about the transition timeline. The room began to move again, chairs pushing back, briefcases clicking shut, the low murmur of people wrapping up. Edmund Hargrove stood. He buttoned his jacket, the way men do when they're trying to pull themselves together. He looked at me across the table. I didn't know, he said again. I know you didn't, I said. He seemed to want to say more. I could see it, whatever it was sitting just behind his expression. An explanation, maybe, or something closer to an apology. But the words didn't come, and after a moment he just nodded once, tight and small, and walked out. My son-in-law found out before my daughter did. I'd called him the night before the signing and told him what was happening. He'd gone very quiet on the phone. I don't know what to say, he said. You don't have to say anything, I told him. I walked out on him, he said. When he let her go, I walked out too. I want you to know that. I know that, I said. She told me. Another silence. Then, I should have seen what kind of man he was sooner. I should have. Hey, I said, stop. You saw it when it mattered. You got up and you walked out. That's what your wife will remember. That's what your daughter will remember. He was quiet. You ready to do something new? I said. He asked me what I meant. I told him we were absorbing the Hargrove logistics operation into our southeastern division. That the existing operations manager position would need to be filled by someone who already knew the routes, the carriers, the contracts, the staff. Someone who had 11 years of experience inside that exact operation. He didn't say anything for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different. Stia dear. Are you offering me a job? He said. I'm offering you a career, I said. There's a difference. The job is the operations manager role. The career is what you build from there, on your own, the same as everyone else who works for me. I don't do favors. I do opportunities. What you make of it is yours. He accepted. My daughter started in the accounting division 2 weeks after the signing. I made a point of staying out of her way. She didn't need me standing over her shoulder, and she didn't want that either. She knew her job. Within her first month, she'd already identified 3 reporting inefficiencies that my team had been living with for 2 years. She fixed all 3. At her 90-day review, her direct manager called me to tell me about her performance. I already knew, because I get the numbers, and the numbers don't lie. But I let him tell me anyway. My son-in-law turned out to be one of the best operations people I'd ever seen manage a transition integration. He had a way with the staff that came over from Hargrove. They trusted him because they'd known him for years, and he was honest with them about what the change meant and what it didn't mean. Nobody panicked. The transition was clean. Edmund Hargrove did his 90-day consulting period. He came in twice a week, answered questions when asked, and was professional. I'll give him that. We were never in the same room after the signing, by mutual design. When his period ended, he sent a brief email thanking the team, and that was the end of it. June turned 5 in the spring. We had her birthday party in my backyard. The big oak in the back corner was strung with lights, and my daughter made her mother's recipe for banana cake with cream cheese frosting. And my son-in-law grilled because he is particular about his grill and won't let anyone else near it, which I respect. June wore a purple dress and ran barefoot in the grass, and at some point decided that she needed to help me water the tomatoes, which she accomplished mostly by watering herself. I stood at the back of the yard watching my daughter laugh at something her husband said. They were standing close together, not performing happiness for anyone, just actually happy. June ran between them and they each caught one of her hands and swung her once, and she shrieked with delight, and the sound went up into the oak leaves and scattered. My wife would have loved this evening. That was the one clear thought I had, standing there. She would have absolutely loved this. I had not told my daughter, that day in the kitchen, everything I meant when I said what I said, about the business, about my reasons for building it the way I did. There was one thing I hadn't quite found the words for. I found them that evening after the cake, after June had crashed in the guest room, with her shoes still on, right feet this time, and my daughter came to sit with me on the porch, while her husband washed dishes inside because that is his way. She brought me a glass of iced tea without asking if I wanted one, because she knows I always want one, and she sat down and we watched the yard in the quiet. I want to tell you something, I said. She looked at me. I built it for a lot of reasons, I said. Good reasons, bad reasons, grief reasons. Your mother, pure stubbornness. But one of the reasons, I stopped, found the words. One of the reasons I kept building all these years was for this. Not to prove anything to anyone. Not for what happened with Edmund, I didn't plan that. But for this right here. Something to hand you. Something that's ours. Something that started with my father working 30 years on a delivery truck and kept going and doesn't stop with me. My daughter was quiet for a moment. The lights in the oak moved a little in the breeze. Bloodline, she said softly. Bloodline, I said. She put her hand over mine on the armrest of the porch chair. Her hand is smaller than her mother's, but she holds the same way, with her whole hand, not just her fingers. We sat there for a while and didn't say anything else, which is the kind of conversation I've always liked best. The lights in the oak kept moving. June was asleep inside, with her shoes on the right feet, and that, if you want to know, is exactly what I meant when I said this was our bloodline.